Okay, we are live. Welcome to the show, everyone. Things are looking pretty good from the Supreme Court. Recent weeks have seen a handful of decisions that went our way, especially those dealing with administrative agencies. Also, Obama is apparently still going on speaking tours, mostly saying that we need more fact checking online and that the government needs to be involved this time. Of course, we all know what that means, and it can pretty much only be Democrats that this kind of thing would come from. And we'll touch on a recently gone viral study that suggests liberals are actually more narrow minded than conservatives, for better or for worse. Also, a new study revealed that who else but China has been funding some of the lawfare that's kept major energy infrastructure from moving forward. I wonder why that might be. We are going to talk about all of this and more in episode 499 of the In the Tank podcast. All right. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. I am Linnea Lueken, your host. We also have, as usual, Jim Lakely, Vice President of the Heartland Institute. And we have Sam Karnick, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute. And we do not have Chris, once again. Dang it, guys. But we do have Donnie in the chat.
Yeah.
How is everybody?
Yes, we're doing great. I'm out here on my back deck in northern Illinois. We just as proof that I have survived the most dangerous heat wave that the Midwest has seen in hundreds of years, apparently. It is a comfortable 89 degrees in the shade. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll see some wildlife behind me. Maybe we'll see, if you're lucky, you'll see a chipmunk come up and disturb this plant right here, which they seem to love to dig in there and get the roots. So you'd be lucky to see something exciting like that. I would be pretty mad because they're doing lots of destruction to my garden. But happy to be here.
Don't even get me started on the scourge that is the chipmunk menace. All right, Sam, what have you got?
I'm just happy to be here, Linnea. Good to see you both.
Awesome. Yeah, we're thinking, so next episode will be episode number 500. And I am thinking that we should probably do a pop culture episode for that one. See what the audience thinks about that. And we'll have Donnie on. Yeah, that'd be great. All right. So before we get started, though, you guys, if you want to support the show, you can always go to heartland.org/inthetank and donate there. Please also click the thumbs up to like this video. And remember that sharing it helps break through YouTube suppression. Even just leaving a nice comment helps too. If you're an audio listener, you can help us out by leaving a nice review. Well, guys, we have our topics to cover this week, and nothing at all has occurred in the news except for the topics we were about to cover since the last time we were on the air, right? Certainly nothing of any international importance that we are not going to discuss. Anyway.
Correct.
So let's talk about someone whose entire legacy has been utterly buried by the bad orange man. So on Unhinged right now, we are going to look at some remarks regarding internet censorship. Do you guys remember Barack Obama? It turns out he's still around, and he's apparently still being invited to speak at some places like the Connecticut Forum, during which he expressed deep concern about how no one trusts facts that they see anymore, because there's just so much misinformation online. From the Daily Caller, Obama is reported as saying, "But part of what we're going to have to do is start experimenting with new forms of journalism, and how do we use social media in ways that reaffirm facts, separate facts from opinion? We want diversity of opinion. We don't want diversity of facts. How do we train and teach our kids to distinguish between those things?" That, I think, is one of the big tasks of social media. And by the way, it will require some government regulatory constraints around some of these business models in a way that's consistent with the First Amendment, but also says, look, there is a difference between these platforms letting all voices be heard versus a business model that elevates the most hateful voices or the most polarizing or the most dangerous in the sense of inciting violence, Obama said. And that, I think, is going to be a big challenge for all of us that we're going to have to undertake. These remarks are interesting in the wake of a big, I think, kind of widespread raids going on in Germany right now, where police are, busting people's doors in to arrest them for saying rude things about immigrants on Facebook or whatever. So, of course, we have all seen the way that this plays out from the Democrat left here. We get little blue rectangles under our YouTube videos. We get deplatformed. We get so-called fact checkers who can't bring themselves to admit it when a Republican says something that's true. So they always
What?
Right. So they always kind of find a way to weasel in and call it a half truth because they didn't mention XYZ context in addition. So there's no reason to believe anything this guy says about safeguards, right? Because Democrats are not interested in facts, actually. It's frankly laughable considering what the trustworthy, fact-forward journalists have been saying about Russian collusion or the Very Fine People hoax or whatever. So, Jim, is Obama totally out of touch or is he just being sly here?
I think he's being sly here. First of all, I want to point out, why is he going out on paid speaking tours? Didn't he famously say, at some point you've made enough money? How many hundreds of millions of dollars has he been given by Netflix, for instance, to produce documentaries that nobody even knew were produced, let alone watched? And now his wife is started a truly dreadful podcast that is only entertaining to watch other podcasters take clips from it and make fun of it. So that's first off. I just wanted to point that out. And he is proving to be, as he has for years now, to be as bad an ex-president as he is a president. And we should be very grateful that, well, I guess he did have his third term with Biden, but we're not going to talk about that today, I suppose. But there's so much to unpack here, and I'm looking forward to hearing Sam's perspective on it. But just taking some quick notes as you were reading through that, Linnea, he says that there is not a business model on social media that to raise dangerous or hateful voices into the fore. It's a business model that adheres to the spirit of the Constitution and free speech. And what Barack Obama wants to go back to is what we were very close to having basically ensconced forever in the United States, which is what they apparently have. Nothing is forever, but it's ensconced very well in the UK, in Britain, where your speech can get you in legal trouble where they will throw you in jail if you say something that the government considers offensive, or more to the point, if you say something that protected classes of the government may find offensive, and how that has been weaponized. The government and the sensitive left have weaponized that mentality that speech is violence. Violence is speech, and speech is violence, so that the government must step in and protect people from speech that makes them sad or makes them angry or makes them uncomfortable. Well, how it often turns out is that it is speech that is inconveniently correct. But all of that is irrelevant. This is the United States of America. And Barack Obama was the president of this great country. And no president, no matter what party they're from, should be speaking like this about advocating for the restriction of the speech of the citizens of the United States, not the subjects of a ruler of the United States. And what this really points out to me is that something that we've known for a long time, and that the left is afraid of speech. They're afraid of free speech. I don't know a single person on the right who is afraid of speech of any kind. The answer to speech you don't like is more and better speech. And thank goodness, the tipping point was Elon Musk buying Twitter for 44, I think it was, $billion. And even though he only bought one social media service, it was the most influential social media service. And it has really changed the game and stopped the momentum toward government suppression of speech that the ruling regime and ruling party and their favored citizens don't like. And so this is good. Barack Obama should be ashamed of himself for speaking like this. And the irony, of course, is that nobody on the right would say that Barack Obama should be banned from speaking because they disagree with what he says, or even if they can factually prove that what he says is not true. Nobody on the right would dare. It's just not in our Constitution to say, in our personal constitutions, to say that Barack Obama should be suppressed because he is spreading falsehoods. And the left is completely opposite of that. And I guess what's good about Barack Obama giving this speech is that he highlights for us that this battle must continue.
Right. Well, and it's not like they have they really are like the worst possible people to be talking about this, right? I mean, it's not like the right has a monopoly on being truthful in journalism. That certainly is not the case. There's plenty of nonsense that comes out from right-wing news sources, but it's not anywhere near to the scale and to the power of the left-wing media, behemoth, right? I mean, just who is going to be the one that gets to decide what facts are true facts that get to stay on the internet? Snopes? PolitiFact? I mean, are we really supposed to believe that these guys are unbiased or like trustworthy? No, of course not. It's just that Obama, his ilk, all the rest of them, they just want complete and utter control over the narrative like they had when the mainstream media was all that we had to look towards. Sam?
If people on the left complain about something, they're the ones doing it. And that's what's going on here. They're the ones trying to gaslight everybody. They're the ones spreading misinformation all the time. We had this absolutely ridiculous and quite insane movement during the COVID era just to suppress anything that would question the lies, frankly, that we were being given by the big government agencies and by the big media, who are financed by the people who made the immunizations. So the whole system is corrupt, and they're the ones who are doing it. As you all know, the right tends to be for free speech, and they live that. They can't even agree with one another. So this notion that somehow we'll decide what the facts are and everybody will agree on the facts it's really, frankly, insane. I mean, how do you get to figure out what the facts are unless you debate them? You
Yep.
can't. You have to have diversity of facts, yes, until you can agree on the facts, and then even after that, people should be able to say, "I still don't agree with your claims, your
Right.
factual claims. They're false."
And it is notable that Obama said, we don't want diversity of facts. We want diversity of thought. And that's a nonsense statement.
Right.
What do you mean you don't want diversity? There are tons of facts that can contradict each other and still be true, that can help to inform someone's worldview. It's not, yeah, no. Reality is not the way that the Democrats want it to be, but this is actually something that really, really extremely well flows into our topic number 2, which is also about diversity of thought itself and the difference between how the right and the left approach diversity of thought. So there was a study from 2023 actually that recently went viral because someone tweeted out a graphic from it. So particularly popular has been this graphic that shows, we're going to bring it up here in a second, a very clustered range of blue dots and a more loosely spread range of red ones, and this represents roughly Democrats and Republicans on different issues. So the Western Journal covered it in a little bit more detail. They said, the study noted that the cluster reflecting the Democrat belief system almost exclusively contained extreme attitudes as indicated by strong disagreement with each of the 8 items, including abortion, immigration, gun control, and gay marriage. But at the same time, the cluster reflecting the Republican belief system contained a wider range of attitude responses ranging from mild disagreement to maximum agreement. Not only does the presented data suggest that Democrats embrace more extreme viewpoints on selected issues compared to Republicans, but also that the Republican cluster includes some surprising issue positions that, under interval assumptions, might be assumed to fall into the Democrat cluster, the study continued. So, though the way that most people are talking about this is just in the kind of funny, haha, look at how Democrats claim to be open-minded, but they really aren't kind of way. And we can definitely do that, and we will, because it is funny. But there is more that we can pull from this too, from a purely political kind of utilitarian standpoint. I actually had less than a knee-jerk positive reaction to this graphic, at least from like a long-term political victory standpoint. Because what I see here is, yeah, a wider range of like uncertainty on different issues of how we approach things. The way that they do these studies is they say, abortion should be illegal. Definitely agree, kind of agree, neutral, definitely disagree, and kind of disagree. And then so Republicans tended to be a little bit more all over the place, and Democrats really tended to narrow in on the yes or no absolute positions. But what I see here is kind of an unstable coalition here where bits can be torn off from the edges on the Republican side. So it's true, I think, that the narrowness of Democrats is hurting them insofar as, they have very extreme positions on very unpopular ideas. They have very little wiggle room when it comes to like the trans kids issue or soft on crime, that kind of thing. But there is something to be said from a politics perspective about this kind of unwavering coalition that they have, right? So, Sam, I would pitch it to you to start. Is like this kind of, or at least is the way that they're presenting this as mindedness a like virtue in and of itself, or I guess I'm kind of conflating like individual eternal open-mindedness with like group beliefs, but I think it's worth looking at it in terms of this as well.
It is a virtue. However, it has its political limitations. Just as you said, the interesting example would be the Big Beautiful Bill, where you have the legislators from New York State saying, "Oh, we can't vote for this because the SALT limitation is in there, which is the limitation on how much you can take off your taxes for the state taxes that you pay, which benefits rich people in big states." Well, the problem is that if this were a Democrat bill, they would just tell everybody, okay, this is where we're going, and that's the way it is. But with Republicans, you can't do that. And with people on the right, you can't do that. There are all different thoughts and opinions. There's diversity of thought that Barack Obama loves so much out there. And that's the problem that you have. When you have a coalition of people who think for themselves, it's hard to get them all together and get them, all marching in the same direction. But it's better that way. And what we need is reforms that will make it so that any small group of people can block the federal government from doing particular actions. That was the way our system was built in the first place, that you have to have total consensus among all three branches of the government. And you have to have, in order to get that consensus, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. We need to get back to that. We need to take power away from the federal government and make sure that everything it does is done through a consensus. And that's the only way past this weakness of the building a coalition of people who are for freedom.
Yeah. Jim, you're muted, by the way, just before we start. But what were your thoughts on this? Because it is funny, Democrats always claim to be, the party of open-mindedness and stuff, and then you see something like this come out. And to be fair, it's one study. I think it is reflective because it certainly reflects what you see in real life when you look at the way that Democrats behave. Right. But yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Well, it is interesting, and it does track with what what the left like to say is your lived experience. It makes sense. It resonates because people see it in their lives. And just on political and policy side, this is that chart with the tiny blue cluster and the wide red cluster shows why the Democrats are on the 20% side on a host of 80-20 issues in this country, completely out of the mainstream. The irony, of course, being if you've watched politics, especially Democratic politics over the last 20 years, guys like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi would just come out of their mouths. It was one of their talking points that Republicans are extreme and outside the mainstream just by advocating for standard conservative policy that's been around for 50 years or even 70 years, as long as National Review has been around. But when you see that chart, that's why you see Democrats on the wrong side of like immigration. That's an 80-20 issue where 80% of Americans, or roughly thereabouts, between 60 and 80, think that a country's borders matters, whether it's Mexico's borders or Spain's borders or England's borders or the United States borders, and that enforcing immigration law as it is on the books is something a broad majority of Americans support. Democrats don't believe that. Letting trans women compete against girls in sports in high school and college and even the Olympics. That's an issue that it's like the left and the Democrats, and they're basically the same. The hard left controls the Democratic Party and their policy at this point. They want to die on that hill of allowing trans women to unfairly compete because they are biologically male against girls and women. And so we're gonna bring this up on the Climate Realism Show tomorrow. Joe Rogan interviewed Bernie Sanders, and I thought of the old joke. The joke is old at this point. Is that the left is looking for their own Joe Rogan, and you had your own Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan, and the reason that he left the left and the Democratic Party, although maybe he was never a registered Democrat, is because he was continually attacked by people supposedly on his side, because if he varied by their orthodoxy by just a millimeter, he would be savaged. And he's like, this is insane. I'm allowed to have my own views. Why can't we agree on 90% of stuff? And then you just let me have my 10% and let me move on with my life. That's not the way it works. It seems to me it's in the mindset, and Andy showed the chart earlier. I don't think we were going to speak about it, at length, but there's like kind of the happiness survey where people on the left, especially younger liberal women, are the unhappiest demographic in America. And I think that's because they let politics dominate their lives almost their every thought. And it's in their mindset to run people out of polite company and even their own friend circles if they disagree with them on politics. People on the right, I think, we're going to generalize here, value things that are a lot more important in life than politics, like friends and having lots of them and getting along and being together and family togetherness and just being polite, over politics. I mean, I have a population of close friends that I know disagree with me on politics. And in fact, I don't even bring up where I work and what I do for a living with them unless I'm
Whoops.
It's because, oops, you lost me there?
The chipmunks were eating your internet.
The chipmunks ate my internet? Okay. Are we back?
You bet.
Are we back? Okay, yeah. I mean, so I'll just make the point here that, and I don't talk about what I do and what I think with my friends unless asked. And it's not because I'm ashamed of anything like that. It's because I know from experience that people that are to the left of me, if my politics don't line up with theirs, they're going to look at me funny, or look at me differently, or maybe even just end our friendship. I know that this has happened to people in my family and in my life. And so I don't want that to happen to me. And then just one last point, the Heartland Institute, we're a libertarian, conservative, so-called right-wing think tank. I like to say we're a free market think tank. You would think that everybody on staff agrees with each other on just about everything. That is completely wrong.
Yeah.
I am in text threads with staffers in this very organization where we get into pretty drag out fights about stuff that we disagree on policy. And so I think it's just kind of, as Sam said, kind of in the nature of people on the right to disagree without being disagreeable.
Is Jim's internet cutting a function of switching between layouts here, or is it? Sorry, guys.
Nope.
All right.
Me. My apologies.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, though. Yeah, no, Jim, and that's something that I reflect on too. When I, the few chances I get the like great opportunity to enter the office and go where did we go now? And go harass people in their cubicles at the Heartland main office. We always get into some kind of like, somebody always is in some kind of like long debate over some kind of policy or system. It's pretty great. All right, so Jim has to drop out for a second because the global warming is killing his internet connection. So we'll move on to the next subject here. Uh, and that is something that is utterly unsurprising, much like many of the issues today. So it turns out that actually a lot of that green lawfare that we've been talking about on the Climate Realism Show and other places is actually being undermined by or is actually being funded by the Chinese. And so, like I said, this is fairly unsurprising. I'm going to read a good chunk from this Fox News article here for you guys. A national security focused nonprofit organization has released a comprehensive report detailing the workings of a well funded, nominally US based organization that it says is undermining American energy, pushing left wing green initiatives, and ultimately advancing Chinese interests. State Armor found that EFC, which is their shorthand for this group, has spent millions of dollars each year to bankroll climate advocates who promote phasing out fossil fuels and implementing green energy alternatives like the Rocky Mountain Institute and National Resources Defense Council, Natural Resources. The Rocky Mountain Institute produced one of the most prominent studies used by many Democrats to justify cutting down on gas stoves and was cited by President Joe Biden's Department of Energy. Okay, guys, so this is how far this goes. This isn't just some like tiny little group that's, putting money here and there. No, this is directly in the White House. EFC also led a U.S. state-level legislative drive against Bayer, the leading Western fertilizer company / medical company, that pushed for lawsuits with the aim of driving the company out of the United States and in turn forcing reliance on Chinese suppliers for those same chemicals. The report goes on to outline how the organization has provided millions to the International Council on Clean Transportation to support a clean energy future, and how ICCT was an active supporter of climate initiatives in the Inflation Reduction Act targeting increased battery electric trucking infrastructure. Okay, so I wonder why. Yeah, to our audience here, Biden was pretty well owned by the CCP in that regard. So this is a major problem, I think, with not just our general issues in terms of green boondongles and everything, but like globalization in general. The idea that we could permit a foreign country to lobby against our industries in our country and fund support for legislation to those ends is just insane to me. So do we have Jim back, or do we still have Sam? Do we have everybody? I wasn't looking at my screen. Okay, Jim is back. Sam, how do we let this even happen? Is there even a path forward to stop this kind of thing from happening? I know in Texas, a bill was just passed saying that state government is not allowed to deal with Chinese affiliated companies anymore. So that's a good step forward. But man, it's crazy to think. And it reminds me a lot, sorry to keep going here, but it reminds me a lot of the Russians funding anti-fracking propaganda in the United Kingdom and also in the United States in order to suppress those industries to boost Russian interests. So, it just shouldn't be allowed, and I'm not exactly sure how to even begin to go about disallowing it.
Well, it's a real puzzle for people who believe in freedom of speech and following the Constitution and the like. That it kind of sends us back again to the 1950s, where the Soviet Union was making every possible effort to infiltrate the United States government and to take over elements of the media and so forth. And it was a real struggle in our country to decide, well, what is too much, and how can we fight back against this? Of course, the American way is to say, well, we'll just all tell the truth, and the truth as we see it, and so we'll fight back with words. Unfortunately, that's not enough. There's a lot of money behind this. And when you have a whole country of more than 1 billion people, there's a lot of money there that they could put into a project of this nature. I think the real problem that we have ultimately is the size of government. Our government just does far too much. And taking it all and putting it in the issue of climate change and global warming and saying, okay, well, we can do anything. We have the right to do anything on the national level or on the state level because it will stop this horrific catastrophe. Well, the reality is that that's a power grab in itself. And when our government has that much power over every element of our lives, of course, it's going to draw corrupt people. It's going to draw them like flies, as the saying goes. And so we really need to get back to our constitutional system, which limits the federal government to the powers enumerated in the Constitution. Until we do that, our government will always be corrupt and always be becoming more and more corrupt.
Yep. Jim, welcome back.
Yeah, it was a little too hot.
How much of that did you catch from us?
I did not catch much of it. It wasn't too hot for me outside, but it was too hot for my MacBook, and so it decided to start to die out there on me. So I am back.
Wow.
Sorry for the panic-induced disappearance.
Well, we had the story that we jumped into is the fact that Chinese companies or Chinese organizations, of course, the CCP, is spending millions and millions of dollars, probably actually a lot more than they've been able to uncover with this study, bankrolling climate lawfare and other things like the like gas stove thing was directly written by one of these groups or was directly funded by one of these groups. So basically they are I mean, obviously China owns the electric car industry, right? Whether or not they're actually the ones specifically manufacturing the vehicles, they manufacture almost every component that matters. And if they're not manufacturing the components, they are controlling the raw resources to do so. And so it's no wonder that they are aggressively trying to stop anything that would help us to kind of unhitch from the Chinese economy, which is something that Trump has, expressed interest in for a long time, and even some Democrats too. So it's pretty remarkable here, Jim. I asked Sam, how do we even get this to stop? Because foreign entities being able to lobby against our own country's interests inside of our country is pretty terrible. And I'm sure it's been going on for a long time with a lot more countries than just China. But I don't know.
It's gone on in the United States. I mean, we started off the show talking about Barack Obama. I mean, he sends his political team over to Israel to campaign against the conservative candidates for the Knesset elections plus prime minister. I mean, you know this as well as I do, Linnea, that the anti-fracking movement in this country was not wholly funded, but the Russians sent a lot of money over here and poured them into anti-fracking groups to stop fracking in the United States. Why? Because Russia, other than the United States, is one of the biggest gas producers in the world. And so they didn't want us to compete with them. And so you ended up with these outfits, and only very few people even knew this. We know it because we're in the business, right? And we're actually, as a nonprofit, competing with a lot of outfits like the Sierra Club and other places. But, should there be a law that you cannot accept any foreign donations if you're a nonprofit organization in the United States? That's an interesting debate. Heartland Institute doesn't take any foreign money, so we're cool. We might be cool with that, but on principle, I think it's actually something that is worth a national conversation. I don't know if this is directly related to this story and the stories that you shared in the show notes today, Linnea, but I did see a couple of clips this morning on X of Ted Cruz talking about Chinese influence and Chinese money flowing into the United States. It is the story, yeah. And it was funny. There was a clip I was going to get this morning, didn't have a chance to. I apologize, but the irony of that was that Sheldon Whitehouse, that despicable enemy of the Heartland Institute, he has mentioned our name as some bugbear that is stopping progress on climate mitigation or fixing the climate crisis, which we're pretty proud of, to be honest. But he's always attacking the Heartland Institute as taking, dark money. And Ted Cruz asked one of his witnesses, which side gets more dark money, the left or the right? And the guy said, well, I mean, studies have shown, or, from what we can track, the left gets a lot more dark money than the right does. And the Heartland Institute doesn't get dark money, but, but that's aside from, and some of that dark money is coming from foreign sources. So the idea that China is funding green groups to suppress the use of fossil fuels, of coal and natural gas, and even nuclear power, and in favor of the solar panels that they manufacture in China, the wind turbines that they manufacture in China. From China's perspective, if they can get away with it, it makes perfect sense. You're just increasing your customer base. And as you said, I don't see a lot of Chinese-made complete vehicles, electric vehicles, driving around roads of the United States, but they are in Europe, they are in other countries. And of course, a lot of the parts for that come from China. So they are, the irony, of course, and the left, they're willfully blind to this, or they just don't care, because it's not part of their agenda. Their agenda is actually suppressing energy development in the United States, traditional, reliable energy development in the United States, for ideological reasons. But China is building 2 new coal plants every week, and they are using that coal power to manufacture green energy components that they sell to the rest of the world, that are being forced through foolish treaties to abandon efficient, affordable energy production. It is completely insane. And the good part is that with the change of administration, our current government isn't going to go along with this kind of garbage anymore. So for at least the next 3.5 years, we have that to look forward to.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of like the scorpion and the frog. Like we know full well what we're getting into when we have a big portion of our economy leaning on a communist, a brutal, frankly, communist country. So, it's like, yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. It's Scorpion the Frog. You know exactly what you were doing when you allowed the scorpion on your back, Mr. Frog. And now he's going to sting you and you're both going to drown.
Right.
So, but, and you can't really blame China. China's going to do what's good for China, right? And what's good for China feels, is colonizing the entire world economically. And they've been pretty darn successful to that end so far. I mean, if you look at Africa, if you look at parts of East Asia or other parts of Asia, the extent to which China has invested in the economies and in the infrastructure of other countries is pretty astonishing, actually, all by themselves.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, and it certainly is no surprise to anybody at the Heartland Institute that they are behind pushing green stuff.
Yeah.
But it is good to see it mentioned at a national level, even though, as I've said before, it does annoy me, these like hearings. I'm very tired of hearings where, senators get to get their points in for re-election campaign and then nothing gets done about it. Like, what are we going to do? Cool. We know that the Chinese are funding, groups doing lawfare against our energy industry. Now what?
Right. I mean, do you want to? I know I'm like you. It's like hearings are meaningless. Action is what matters, and I'm tired of people talking about it. I'm going to trigger myself. It's like the idea of the deep state and how James Comey, and he should be arrested, and there should be a real investigation, criminal investigation, as to what happened with the non-peaceful transfer of power between the Obama administration and the Trump administration, because that's what it was. And so we've had all these hearings on those subjects, and nothing is ever done about it, and everyone's going to get away with the bad things that they did. And this is going to be the same thing here with foreign Chinese money coming in and influencing policy and, frankly, even legislation in the United States, and nothing's ever done about it. They're barely even talking about it. I know these hearings probably trigger you as well. Andy did find a clip that I was talking about with Ted Cruz and Sheldon Whitehouse.
Shoot, go ahead, play it.
All right.
The first prong of this coordinated campaign is a strategic alliance, a cozy financial partnership between leftist billionaires, radical environmental organizations, and the Chinese Communist Party. One of the primary vehicles for this alliance is Energy Foundation China, which has funneled upwards of $12 million to U.S.-based climate advocacy groups since 2020. And this money isn't going to tree planting campaigns or to science fairs. It's flowing directly to aggressive litigation outfits like the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Rocky Mountain Institute, and the World Resources Institute, organizations that routinely file lawsuits trying to block pipelines, trying to ban gas-powered vehicles, and trying to bankrupt oil and gas companies. On paper, Energy Foundation China's goals may sound benign. Support for clean coal, electric vehicles, and global decarbonization. But that raises the obvious question. If this is truly about reducing emissions, why isn't China investing that money in reducing its own pollution? China is the #1 polluter on planet Earth. Communist China emits more carbon than the United States and Europe combined. The answer is simple, because this is not about climate. It is about global energy dominance and control. And it gets worse. The man at the helm of Energy Foundation China, Xi Zhao, is not a neutral administrator. He is a former senior official in China's National Development and Reform Commission, the agency responsible for writing the CCP's 5-year plans, coordinating industrial expansion, and steering national energy policy. Between 2000 and 2009, and again from 2012 to 2015, Professor Zhu served as a key member of China's official climate negotiation team, including during the run-up to the Paris Agreement, a deal that gave China a free pass to increase emissions until 2030, while demanding immediate, costly reductions from the United States. That was not an accident. That was not a bug. That was the purpose.
Yep. All right. That's probably enough on the clip. One, I want to point out to our audience that we all hate the way that Cruz, I'm just assuming that everybody else, including myself, hates the way that Cruz framed this issue, talking about carbon dioxide as a pollutant with such aggression. It's so cringe. The Republicans have to stop. Somebody needs to get a new talking points sheet. China is the world's biggest polluter, maybe other than India, but it's not the carbon dioxide. That's the problem. It's everything else.
They're the largest carbon dioxide emitter, but carbon dioxide is not pollution. How is that so hard to figure out and say? It takes 2 seconds.
I don't know. It's just, Republicans have not gotten the updated talking points yet. We'll have to send it to them. All right. So
Linnea,
since the Heartland Institute apparently runs the Trump administration, as we have been told by, who was it? Media Matters or whoever.
Right.
What this comes down to is the Chinese Communist Party is going to do what's good for the Chinese Communist Party. They don't have any concern for China as such or the people of China. And the problem we have here is the problem we've had since China was let into the World Trade Organization, which is that you cannot deal with a communist country the way you would with a liberal nation, a modern liberal nation. You can't do it. They're going to try and cheat you in every way they can. They're going to try to undermine you in every way they can. They're going to try to do everything they can to get more resources and more power for themselves. And that's what's going on here. And the United States has got to develop some sort of approach where we can, as a nation, say what is best for us and pursue that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, speaking of pursuing what is best for us, the Supreme Court has our back here. So, thank you for that good transition, Sam. So, on June 20th, the Supreme Court released a whole slew of rulings that made it clear that this SCOTUS has absolutely no problem with taking down unelected bureaucrats when they're reaching beyond their little agency's proper scope here. So Red State put together a really nice list with summaries. So I will read some of those to us, to our group here, and we will comment on them. So first, there was one that I had not heard of, which was McLaughlin Chiropractic Associates versus McKesson Corp, restoring courtrooms role. So in McLaughlin Chiropractic, the court made it clear that agency interpretations do not control private litigation. The issue is whether district courts must follow FCC interpretations of the Telephone Consumer Protection Act simply because those interpretations are subject to review under the Hobbs Act, also known as the Administrative Orders Review Act. So the court said no. District judges must independently interpret statutes, even when an agency has already spoken on it. As Justice Kavanaugh put it, when a statute is clear, it is the law, not the agency's interpretation, that governs. So this one is pretty good, you guys. We've had lots of issues in the past with agencies trying to like move the rules around and stuff on like litigation related issues. So I don't know if anyone has any particular comments about this one. The next two are a lot more pertinent to the kind of work that we usually do. But even though this isn't dealing specifically with the EPA or something, what the Supreme Court is doing is they are laying, precedent for other cases in the future here. And this is good. As Kavanaugh said, it's the law that governs, not an agency's interpretation that governs. So, okay. The next one that they released was Diamond Alternative Energy versus EPA, where the court made it easier for businesses harmed by regulations to challenge them in court. Fuel producers brought a case against the EPA for approving California's Clean Air Act waiver, arguing that it would reduce demand for traditional fuels, which is obviously true since that's literally what the waiver was intended to do. So the lower court dismissed the case, claiming that the producers couldn't prove that automakers would go back to gasoline-powered cars if the waiver were thrown out. And the Supreme Court reversed that decision. They said, when a regulation predictably harms a business, even indirectly, that business has standing to challenge it. Guys? Nice. Any thoughts on that obvious one?
Well, I'll start. The interesting angle here to me is that the Supreme Court has really developed a system of what they're trying to do, which is that the people on the right on the Supreme Court, or the sort of more conservative judges, as they're being called, are pursuing looks at the process. They're looking at the process of things. So they say that if the lower court has decided that you cannot sue for this because you don't have standing, the Supreme Court is saying, and it's the Supreme Court's job to keep the lower courts in line and tell them how they're supposed to decide things. So what the court is saying is that, well, you can't just kick something out and say, well, you can't sue for that. You don't have standing for it. The Supreme Court does that in certain cases, and lower courts do that all the time. But the problem that you have is when that's obviously politicized, which it is, then you need to get to a fairer kind of outcome. And so what they're doing is they're looking at the processes and finding critiques of the legal decisions that are made by the lower courts and saying, well, you haven't followed the rules there and you haven't done what you're supposed to do. But they're actually getting the results that we would want. So what was interesting here is that we've had judicial activism over the decades where the left would continually say, well, you can't do this, you have to do that, and basically legislating from the bench. Well, what's going on here is that the Supreme Court now, the conservatives on the court, are using the processes themselves, the processes of litigation, and stating that, well, you didn't get it right this time, and so it has to go back to you, and you have to follow these rules. That's a better system. I say just win, baby, like L. Davis used to say. I say just win, baby, but they are winning. We are getting a better approach to the administrative state and a shrinking of it, an incredible shrinking of it. So, but they're using they're using good law, I think, is the key thing here. They're using good law to make this, and good arguments to make their case. And that's a little different from saying, well, you know, a sociologist said that this would be bad if this happened, if this law happened. Well, that's too bad. That's Congress's right and the right of the president to make those laws come to fruition and to execute them. And if you don't like it, Supreme Court, that's too bad for you. So what they're doing now is fairer and more just, but it's also working to our advantage. Those of us who are in that big giant coalition of people on the right.
Yep. And, you know, this case in particular, it's just so, it kind of blows my mind that a lower court would dismiss it, other than the fact that it was probably in California and they're like all crazy over there. I don't know what they're putting in the water, but the idea that like a business cannot petition it or cannot file against an administrative agency when they make a rule that specifically would attempt to put their business out of business or to harm their company is just absurd, that they would not even be allowed to litigate it. The lower court claims that the producers could not prove that automakers would go back to gasoline-powered cars if the waiver were thrown out, when the waiver is essentially attempting to phase out the legal sale of gas-powered cars. Is just a wild statement to try to make. Jim?
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason why these decisions to rein in the administrative state to where it constitutionally belongs is that the left has used the administrative state to impose its policy preferences via the bureaucracies and the sue and settle strategy in courts for decades now. There is so much more work to do on this front. These cases are very encouraging. It's frankly because Donald Trump got to appoint as many Supreme Court justices as he has that these decisions even came down. That lower court ruling, which is absurd on its face, that you don't even have standing to sue because you can't prove that outlawing the internal combustion engine is going to affect your business. I mean, and at the same time, a lot of these lower courts end up giving standing to people who shouldn't have standing, like allowing children to sue the state of Montana or maybe all of big oil because they're going to make the planet unlivable through the use of fossil fuels. Those sorts of cases just continually go forward. I mean, thankfully, a lot of those are being tossed out recently, but they've gone pretty far along, and there's still lots of pending cases right now. You know, I asked this on the Climate Realism show the other day, I think to Sterling Burnett. You know, didn't we get a Chevron defense or a deference review by the Supreme Court a while back? Where the court says that, basically the Chevron defense or the Chevron deference means that it gave almost unlimited power to the bureaucracies and the administrative state to establish what law is with almost no oversight. And that's not what Congress intended. That's not what the Constitution intends for Congress just to give carte blanche power. And it's always increasing by all these bureaucracies. The Environmental Protection Agency is the worst offender on this and has been for decades. But, when you're going through these cases, Linnea, I was thinking of Sam, you might remember the case, but Justice Thomas, I think, had a concurrence where he talked about there's no reason to think that experts, so-called experts, are correct, whether they're in the bureaucracy or there are witnesses brought forward, and that courts should not assume that because somebody is a quote-unquote expert that they have the correct answer, and that the deference needs to be with the legislatures and the people to be their own experts and to make their own decisions on public policy, and not leave it to basically unelected bureaucrats to just who claim to be experts and to set policy for everyone. The classic example, of course, was during the pandemic. Every government expert was completely wrong about the pandemic. I don't want to use the word. Can we say pandemic? Can you say that and not get demonetized these days? but you all know what I'm talking about. They were wrong on just about every single major issue, but they were the so-called experts, and we had to do what they said. And legislatures, for the most part, or governors, be damned. So these cases are very encouraging. I think this is the first time in a long time that any of us have seen the Supreme Court rule in this fashion, in a way to rein in the power that unelected bureaucrats have in setting policy in this country. And that is good, but there is a long, long way to go to get us back to where we should be constitutionally, in which the people's representatives are setting policy and not unelected bureaucrats.
Right. And so the next one we have on the list here is FDA versus R.J. Reynolds Vapor Company, limiting agency on gatekeeping on who can challenge rules. So in this one, the court pushed back on the FDA's attempt to control who could challenge its decisions. The agency argued that only manufacturers could challenge its denial of pre-market approvals. The court disagreed and ruled that retailers, who are also harmed by these decisions, have every right to challenge them. So that's another good one, you guys. So on their own, like I said at the beginning here, none of these are the one like big hammer delivering the particular blow to the administrative state. They're very boring. They're very dry, taken individually, but they each put up a little barrier here, a little rule here, a little thing that says, actually people can challenge you, agencies, on this. You are not the final say for all time on everything. You are not someone who is not allowed to be challenged. So little things here and there do deliver a blow to the agencies. And, to be a fly on the wall at EPA or FDA or something this week. They're probably not happy at all. And in addition to those, SCOTUS also did a couple of good upheld a couple of good rulings elsewhere, including the Tennessee ban on child sex changes. Chief Justice John Roberts, and this was in the Post-Millennial that I pulled this article from, but Chief Justice John Roberts had a good opinion. He wrote it, and I thought that this was worth quoting. He said, "This case carries with it the weight of fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in an evolving field. The voices in these debates raise sincere concerns. The implications for all are profound. The Equal Protection Clause does not resolve these disagreements, nor does it afford us license to decide them as we see best. Our role is not to judge the wisdom, fairness, or logic of the law before us." Then they reference something. I'm going to skip that. Okay. But only to ensure that it does not violate the equal protection guarantee of the 14th Amendment. Having concluded that it does not, we leave questions regarding its policy to the people, their elected representatives, and the democratic process. And this can be frustrating for some people when it comes to the way that Supreme Court rules on certain issues, or the way any court rules on certain issues. But we do have to remember, you guys, that it also depends on how a case was brought before the court, right? So sometimes the Supreme Court rules in a way that we don't like because we think that the point of the thing that we were trying to achieve is so important, and it usually is. But a lot of times, if our side brought a crappy argument to the Supreme Court, they're not going to just side with us on it, and they shouldn't. They should be siding with good arguments. What happens is the leftist judges side with things based on the downstream effects of whatever it is. And that's why you see them, it's always right now 6-3, 6-3, 6-3 on everything that's been going on recently, because the leftists are using it as a activist position rather than just looking at the letter of the law and looking at the merits of the case that's brought before them. In this case, it was the left that brought a bad case before the Supreme Court, and so we were able to uphold a ban on child sex changes in Tennessee. So that's very good, you guys. And then also the Supreme Court granted the Trump administration's request to stay a lower court injunction blocking them from deporting individuals to third-party countries without prior notice, a near-term win for the Trump administration as it looks to quickly enforce its immigration crackdown. This is another one. The case that was brought was very narrow, very specific, and so the Supreme Court was able to rule in Trump's favor in this case. It's frustrating sometimes to watch the legal back and forth when you just want the results that will forward your political policy. But I think generally this court has been doing a very good job.
What's going on is the court has moved away from consequentialism to proceduralism, where instead of we're going to shoot for a result, we want abortion to be allowed all across the country, so we're going to get that result one way or another. Instead, what they're saying is that there are processes and systems in place and documents that tell you how things work, and so we're going to follow those. And so what happens is you have what the Supreme Court has finally decided through the six somewhat conservative justices is that the legislation should be done by the legislature, and the execution of the laws should be done by the executive. And the Supreme Court has made the premise that they won't stand in the way of that. And that's what you got out of the Roberts decision that you just quoted. And that was Roberts saying, we don't necessarily have to like it. We don't necessarily agree with the premises of this. We don't necessarily agree with what's going to come of it, that it's a good thing. But it's not our call. It's the legislature's call to write those laws. It's the president's law to decide whether to veto them or not. And if something becomes law, it's the president's job to execute it. And that means understanding what that law says and deciding that they're going to follow the letter of the law. So the court has gotten away from just deciding things and legislating from the bench, which is an enormously important reform, and we should be very happy to have it. Now let's have more of it every year.
Yeah, I mean, as I started talking about this issue, I mean, it's important to remember that the left has achieved most of their policy victories through the courts and the administrative state. And we are finally seeing a little at a time, and as you pointed out, Linnea, these, case by case. As a layperson, you just want the Supreme Court to say, enough. This is what the Constitution says. The president actually has the power to be a president. He can execute the laws like our immigration laws because he is the president. And if you don't like it, you had your chance to have him not be president back in November, and you lost. Too bad. He gets to impose his policies under the law as written. The fact that he has to keep going to court to challenge these challenges to his proper executive power is frustrating. And you want the Supreme Court to just stand up and say enough, but that is not how our system works. The good news is as Sam had also pointed out, this is a process that is going on little by little by little by little, but this is all setting precedent that is going to be very difficult, especially I think because it's in smaller pieces. It's going to be very difficult to overturn or to reverse, I should say, the momentum on a more constitutionalist viewpoint on separation of powers than we've had in the past. It's hard to imagine, it's actually impossible to imagine this court coming up with emanations and penumbras that under the right to privacy enact something like nationwide abortion is allowed. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the patron saint of abortion law in the United States, even she admitted that Roe v. Wade was crap law. As law, it was garbage, but she supported it because it advocated her policy preferences. And that makes you, I think, a bad judge and a bad justice. The purpose and one last thing I just wanted to mention here, since we're kind of talking about the Supreme Court, the whole idea, and this may be in a whole other show, and we can get a legal expert on here to talk about it, but the whole idea that the Supreme Court is the only arbiter of what is constitutional is false. There are three co-equal branches of government, and they all get an opinion on what is constitutional, and they are all allowed to act under their own constitutional powers. So we are, Marbury versus Madison, from very early in the birth of the United States, set us down this road of judicial review. Judicial review is one thing; judicial supremacy is quite another. And I think what we're seeing from this court is a return to judicial review and not judicial supremacy, which is a great thing if you believe in the separation of powers and individual liberty.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. And I think we have one question here that I want to address real quick from K1, who says, will Trump's next justice be Amy Coney Barrett or Gorsuch? I don't know. I think Trump, he has a good diversity of typically conservative leaning choices that he makes, right? I think that a lot of us get very frustrated when judges don't go the way that we want them to on issues that we think are important. But I think that most of these people have been relatively consistent. So whatever it is, I'm going to be a plan truster when it comes to Trump picking justices, because it's been working out pretty well so far.
Yeah, you could have done a little better on maybe one or two of them, but one thing we do know is that, because we see it, the record speaks for itself. Democrat and leftist liberal judges always vote in the block, always vote for the policy they desire, and usually write very unimpressive dissents trying to justify their policy positions, whereas the conservative majority, as you mentioned, you need to have a legal justification and a good argument for it. And so no matter who Trump picks, it's at least going to be in that regard. I really hope. I mean, there was a scuttlebutt that I've been reading the last couple of days that it could be after this term, because we're almost done with them releasing their decisions in the summer, that we may get an announcement that Alito or Thomas will resign. I don't think we can lose them. I really like Alito and Thomas. I really think they should stay on the court.
Scary.
I want Roberts to resign.
Yeah, go away, Roberts. You can leave. Yeah, I don't mind that. Yeah, no, but it's funny. This is a good way to close the show, though, you guys, because the Supreme Court is an excellent example of that heat map. Right. that diversity of thought map. Our Republican or our more right-leaning or more conservative justices are all over the map in terms of their particular temperaments, the types of proceduralism that they tend to focus on, their kind of judicial ethic and everything. They're like all over the place. And the three very left-wing justices are like this.
Yep. 100%.
They do not waver. I've yet to see one. At least I could be wrong, but I do not believe that they have ever broken from their Democrat orthodoxy on a judicial ruling. So yeah, awesome way to end the show. Thank you guys so much for that. Okay, so that is all the time that we have today, you guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We are live every single week on Thursdays at noon Central on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Jim, what do you have to pitch for us this week?
Join us at the same time on Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, where we're hosting the Climate Realism Show, and we're going to have a very special guest. Some of you climate nerds know the name Will Happer. He's going to be joining us and talking about his new paper. It's going to be great. See you tomorrow.
Absolutely. Sam?
Thank you. You can follow me on social media at St. Karnick, and please go to heartland.org and check out all the wonderful articles we have there, including Life, Liberty, Property, my newsletter.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. And for audio listeners, please give us a nice rating on whatever service you're using. Leave a review, whatever you want to do. Thank you guys, everybody, for being here. We will see you tomorrow for the Climate Realism Show. And for In the Tank, we will see you next week for episode 500. All right. Bye, guys.
What we should really do right now is just sit around and talk about all the times back in the day when me and Barack would run around the hallways of the White House with candies, and we'd snip the kids' hairs